I'm Alex Howard.
And I'm Amanda Silver. And this is Dirty Laundry. Do you see my elves? Are we on? Are we live?
Always.
Did you
always
see my
live.
Did you see my setup today when you came in?
Yeah.
The snow in my
It's
kitchen.
a lot. Like how much time are you dedicating to these elves?
First of all, disclaimer. I just want to put out a warning. If you
What
are
if children
under
are listening? Yeah.
if you are under the age of 12, turn this show off because what you're about to hear might change your feelings about Christmas. Just warning. Okay, now that we've said that,
Tell us all the spill the
now that
tea.
we've said that, I'm obsessed. I look forward to it all year.
It's
This is my
amazing.
4th year doing the elves. I just want to preface it with saying I'm Jewish and I celebrate. What?
Wait, I don't think anybody knows that. Hang on.
I'm Jewish, proudly Jewish, celebrate Hanukkah, but I've always had like a little Christmas spirit in here. I love the holidays.
There's like
I
a
love
little Christmas gnome deep
There's
down.
A little yes, and I love the music. And so the elves, I do the elves, and it has nothing to do with with religion. It's just like, what are they getting up to at night?
Yeah.
And my kids, like I'm telling you, like for a parenting hack, it gets them to bed. Because it's like, you better go to bed because the elves are coming and they want to see that you've gone to bed and let's see what silliness they get up to. And so I wait all year for this. And I usually start December 1st and like every day until like the 20th or the 25th or whatever.
So keen.
They get up to something.
You're a much better mom than I am.
And so like, but also my family has kind of gotten into it.
Okay.
Where like my dad and like my sister-in-law will send me like Pinterest ideas and Instagram reels about like different elf ideas. So I've started this like collaborative like album to gather all of my elf ideas.
And so again, I ask, how much time are you dedicating to this?
Can you put
Because you're doing it every
can you put a
night.
price? No, I'm not doing it every night. Okay, so because my kids go back and forth between
fair.
my house and their dad's house, they're not at my house every night.
Right.
So let's
that
say
helps.
50% of December they're with me.
Okay.
So and then we usually go away. So it's like I would say it's about 10 or 12 days. Of elves.
Yeah.
So
And like, what are your most notable moves? Give some inspo to those that maybe have elves of their own.
Oh, that's a very good one. I have to look back at my like other.
I feel like there was some kind of glitter bomb situation.
A
confetti.
lot of.
What was it from
I
last
find
year?
the ones that like are most successful are the ones that cause the most mess.
Sure.
So the kids love to see when the elves like make a
Because
mess
the whole
at
thing is that the elves are quite
they're
like,
naughty.
mischievous.
They're
Oh,
not.
naughty.
They're naughty. Like they have like a naughty side to them.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. I toilet papered my house and they like loved it.
So again, I ask, how much time? You are not only setting up all this chaos and drama of these naughty elves, then you have to clean up.
Yes.
Or do they clean up?
The elves clean up.
Okay, with the elves.
No,
but
the kids, no, we don't touch. You cannot touch the elves because then they'll lose their magic.
Oh.
So you can't touch them.
Why are the holidays so manipulative? I'm like, guys, Santa's always watching. The other day I was like, Bridget, have you done your letter to Santa?
Yeah.
And she goes, Mom, he knows when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. I'm pretty sure he knows what I want. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. She's too smart.
You know what it comes down to? It comes down to desperation. Parents, parental desperation. We will do whatever we can to get our kids to listen to us.
Yeah, it's fair.
And to go to bed and to do their homework and to do all the
Yeah.
things. And if it has to be elves or Santa or whatever,
We're doing it.
we're going to use it.
Yeah, we got to use whatever is in our
Parental
arsenal.
desperation.
Yeah, I like it.
But speaking of the holidays,
yes,
it's
and
not
rituals.
such a merry time for everybody. And yes, the elves are my ritual.
Yeah.
But it's not always such a merry time for everybody,
Yeah.
especially some of our clients and our listeners who are going through divorce. This might be the first holiday sort of on their own or post-separation where they're kind of uncomfortable. They're still living together, but they have to share the holidays and the family's coming over. And does the family come over? And there's just so much to deal with. A lot of grief, a lot of feelings of grief going into. So we've brought on a grief expert, Megan Sheldon, who is the CEO and founder of Be Ceremonial, which is an app which allows you to customize your own like grief experience.
Yeah. Megan is a grief doula and she specializes in rituals and ceremonies and what they mean to each individual. It's so
and marking those ceremonies.
cool.
And it's so interesting because she'll talk about the vast array of things that cause us to feel grief in our life and things that we shouldn't ignore but should really give space to
and lean into. I love it. So let's bring her on.
So welcome, Megan, to Dirty Laundry. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, and we'd
Good.
love to begin by hearing a little bit about your background and how you got into the work that you do.
Hmm. Well, it's so
Mhm.
interesting kind of, at this point in life, looking back and starting to see where the threads really first
Mhm.
started. I have taken an unusual career path, that's for sure. There was no straight line, A to B. But I think where it really stems is I've always been fascinated by storytelling. I love
Mm.
listening to stories, capturing stories, weaving them together. I identify as a writer, so writing has been my main
Mm.
medium of storytelling. But I've been fascinated by the way that we tell stories across culture, across time. So after doing a degree in journalism, I found my way to Scotland in my 20s and I was studying
Cool.
mythology. So I did a master's in cultural
Ooh.
mythology. My father looked at me and said, "What the hell are you going to do with that?"
Yeah.
So, and I said, I don't know, but I'm being called into this world of myth and folklore and fairy tales
Mm.
and ritual and ceremony without a clear kind of path forward. That year turned out to be quite transformative for me because it was set in Scotland, where my ancestry comes from. And the year that I was
Mm.
born, three of my grandparents died, and my one remaining
Oh, wow.
grandmother, my Scottish matriarch, while I was living in Scotland, she sent me our family history, letters from my great grandparents, and all of our kind of lineage and connections to the people that we came from. So while I was
Wow.
yeah, so while I was living there, I got to kind of go on this journey to reconnect with my roots and kind of position myself. I think a lot of Canadians and North Americans might feel the same way as I do, where we want to know where we come from, what we're connected to, what
Mm.
rituals we have access to, and what stories kind of are part of us.
Yeah,
So
that's so
wonderful.
cool. I want
Yeah,
a
and to have that.
living journey of, past relatives and all of that. That's so beautiful. So, as a writer, are you writing your own stories now, like for your children and future generations? Is that a priority for you to kind of keep that tradition going?
Yeah, so I came home from Scotland and I started a brand storytelling company. So I had a marketing firm, and so I
Mm.
told other people's stories, and that's where I kind of felt most comfortable. And part of that work was to kind of look at a company and gather stories from all perspectives, and then weave them into this
Mm.
meta narrative that became the story of who they are and why they exist. And then along the way, life and death happened in and around
Mm.
me. So my husband's father died, and we went through recurrent miscarriages. So
Mm.
I started to suddenly care less about the other stories outside of me and more the stories
Mm.
that were happening within me. And I also
Mhm.
started to feel the void of the ritual and ceremony that I had access to or that was offered to me.
Yeah.
There was no ceremony
Mm.
coming home from the hospital after a miscarriage. There was no ceremony when your father-in-law receives a terminal diagnosis. What do you
Mm.
do on that day? So I just got really curious
Mhm.
about how to support myself and others through those invisible moments.
Yeah, and
And
people
so
don't do grief well. I don't know if that's like a cultural thing, and maybe I'm just very much in this world of, as you said, sort of North America, where we're incredibly uncomfortable with feelings, with demonstrating emotion, and even more when people are demonstrating a lot of emotion sort of towards us or at us. And so you do such a wonderful job of sort of sharing your stories and destigmatizing a lot of that and encouraging people to think differently, I think, about grief. How do you get the courage to just share so openly and so vulnerably about stuff that is so hard for, 95% of the world?
Well, I come by it honestly. I don't have much of a filter, which I imagine neither do you. If you're,
I
There's
think
a lot of
that's
synergies here.
I'm like nodding my head. It's
Yeah.
true. If
Yeah.
you're a storyteller or a speaker or an orator, like you just have to sort of let it all out and
Mhm.
not be as concerned with that filter.
yeah, and I've always been a gatherer, a convener. Community is incredibly important to me. So I'm a reluctant leader. I don't think I'm not like a
Mm.
type A leader who needs to be at the front of the stage. I actually have a lot of fear about public speaking.
Mm.
And yet here I am, a celebrant and
Yeah.
ceremonialist. I just did a ceremony for the end of somebody's life. An employee at Lululemon died, and I created a ceremony
Mm.
for over 5,000 people. And so that morning, I'm
Wow.
like, what am I
Wow.
doing? Why?
Yeah.
This is terrifying to me. And yet there I go, getting up on stage and sharing somebody else's story that I've gathered
Mm.
through, story chats and connections with others. So yes, we are in a grief phobic society, death denying, especially here in the Western world. I've lived in other parts of the world where it wasn't quite the case, and I've learned a lot from those cultures. I think that for me, at least, I felt so alone in my less visible moments of grief. Surrounding a death, there's usually people that show up, but it's in those kind of moments where nobody knows what to say or what to do. That's when the isolation really starts to set in. And so my seeking is around community in those moments. So how do we bring people together? How do we share our stories? How do we feel supported? And as I started to rebuild a relationship with ritual and ceremony, that for me was the answer. It was like, we come together in ceremony, we perform rituals to bring out the stories, to make us feel less alone.
Yeah.
So how does a ritual and ceremony differ from, let's say, a memorial or a funeral or something like that? What is the difference?
So it's not so much a difference is if you think about a funeral or a celebration of life as an event. Within that event, people are going to arrive, they're going to put their coats up, they're going to get a drink, they're going to maybe have a bit of small talk. They might not have seen each other for a while. They might give each other some hugs. And then at some point, the ceremony will begin. And there are cues that we use, the ringing of bells, the singing of a song, taking a deep breath together, something that allows us to kind of our parasympathetic nervous system to relax a little and say, I am now stepping into a sacred ceremonial space. Some people are really good at doing that. Some people are really bad at doing that. And so that's the difference, I think, having been to many funerals where I don't know when the actual ceremony starts or not. And so it's a bit disconcerting as to, like, has it started? Can I talk to the person next to me? Like, I'm not sure what the protocol is. We worry so much about what we're supposed to do versus what feels natural and what feels right. So then for me, the ceremony is the container that holds a series of rituals. And I've studied a lot of the history. I mean, I'm a scholar. I'm somebody who loves research and kind of looking into the etymology of where things come from. And so most cultures around the world will take a ceremony and they'll have different rituals within that. And rituals that might help us let go of the past, acknowledge what was. A lot of academics call this the separation. So we're separating from who we were, what we knew. So if you think about a wedding, there's a moment where you are no longer that single person. You're no longer that version of yourself. You're now stepping into this middle part of the ceremony where we are present with what is. This is kind of the transition. This is often the liminal space where people aren't quite sure if they're, what to do. And so as a ritualist, this is where I love to kind of invite people to pause. I think back to my own wedding, there was a moment where the celebrant, we were on the beach in Tofino. He invited everybody to just kind of close their eyes and we were on the beach in the middle of a storm, to feel the wind, to feel the rain, and just to be present and acknowledge how important this moment was. And it was such a gift for him to help us be present and acknowledge this is where we are right now. It's not about what comes next. It's not about where we came from before. And then the final part of the ceremony is choosing a ritual that helps us walk forward. Like, what are we going to do following this? How are we going to carry this legacy or this story forward? And there's so many creative and wonderful thousands of ways to do those rituals within that ceremonial framework. But that's how I define it. And that's my kind of wheelhouse.
And then what about differentiating between traditions and rituals? Can you speak to that? Like, what are those differences or maybe commonalities?
So for me, the difference between a ritual and a routine is the routine is something that we fall into. We do it out of habit. We just kind of do it because this is what we're supposed to do. And it starts our day off right. We fall into that. Whereas a ritual is intentional. You step into a ritual. So you might still have your morning ritual involving your morning coffee, but you might instead choose to reflect on your own childhood and maybe the way that your father made the coffee and take a moment to remember his life, his legacy. Or as you're sipping your morning tea, you might take a moment to set an intention for the day of what you want to feel like, what you want to kind of bring to that day, the energy that you want to kind of step into. So you're transforming that action, that kind of everyday habit, into a ritual by being intentional and kind of drawing on symbolism and things that are meaningful to you. A tradition is something that's passed down over time. And I think that we get kind of mixed up with our rituals and our traditions. I just hosted a workshop all about holiday traditions and holiday rituals. And it's quite meaningful because people, I think, sometimes continue to do traditions even though they've lost the intention of it. They've lost the meaning. They don't know why they're doing it anymore. And it actually can be quite harmful to some people, especially given the state of the world and, the obligations that we feel. So my hope is that, yes, it's important to pass down rituals over time and have them hold that kind of sanctity. And there's this other world over here where we get to make up our own rituals. We get to reinvent them. We get to try them once and maybe never do them again because it didn't work for us. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be repeated and rigid and religious. Like, it can actually be really fun and playful and offside. I mean, I've done a lot of divorce ceremonies.
Right.
And so there's some
Yes,
really,
I have so many questions about
We're
that.
going to get into that for
Yes,
sure.
yes. Let's talk about the divorce ceremony. When you talk about the death of a marriage, for some people it's expected because they could,
Or it's their choice.
or it's their choice, right? They could see it coming. It's years of preparation. They're preparing themselves emotionally in every which way. For others, it's not. And so how do you handle that grief? It's a sudden grief that comes on that they could not have prepared for.
Yes. And I think that if we are going to look at how we get divorced, we need to look at how we get married. Because so much of how we get married is wrapped up in a cloak of perfection. And we don't really have some of those harder conversations. When my husband and I decided to get married, his father had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And we were gathering our two families in Tofino, British Columbia. And I wanted to create a ritual for the elephant in the room, which was the grief we were all holding and the fact that this would be our only time as two complete families together in person. And everybody tried to talk me out of it. They're like, no, this is your wedding. It should be happy.
Yeah.
And I was just like, no, this is important. It's more important for me to show up with, what's important to us as a community, as two families, and to create space for it rather than shove it aside and, just deny it's there and instead focus on like an Instagram worthy wedding that we're going to, So I think that the wedding culture has, I always say we get married in this big kind of hoopla with all this community. And then I've had many friends get divorced. They get divorced kind of shamefully and quietly and without a lot of community. And so I think that there's the two sides of those, right? It's like the birth of something and the death of something, they're connected. And so in order to change how we get divorced, I do think we need to reexamine how we're getting married. And I think that's been happening. People have let go of like the big weddings, there's more elopements than ever. COVID really
I think COVID did that.
And
it forced people to realize, I don't really need that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not as important as I thought. It gave people permission
Yes.
to have smaller ceremonies. And I've heard that for different types of ceremonies, for not just weddings, but bridal showers and circumcisions and birthday parties, all the things that were just building to how many people could you invite?
A lot of keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, I feel like COVID kind of reset us in that way. Maybe it's a benefit that came out, which is like, it's okay to go back to basic.
Yes.
And just keep it small.
Yeah. And the other thing about divorces, because my first divorce ceremony that I convened happened about 8 years ago, and I had never done one before. I'd never been to one. I didn't even know they were a thing. But my best friend and my husband's best friend, who were married, they weren't actually even married. They were common law. So there wasn't even the divorce kind of official proceedings. They just kind of split, but they had a child together. And I was grieving so much. I was like, what are we going to do? This has hurt me. It's hurt my husband. It's hurt them. It's hurt our family, our communities, our group of friends. And so I reached out to her and I said, I really want to create something for you and for us because this has impacted all of us in different ways. And I want us to show up and support you. And I want to give you a space to kind of shed what you need to shed and move into this next chapter. But I didn't want to impose it on her. But as soon as I planted the seed, she was like, yes, well, I don't know what it is, but I want that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, we ended up doing it just as a community of women, which is mostly the divorce ceremonies I do. Sometimes, the ex-partner will come and there will be men involved, less often. And hopefully that will be something that shifts a little bit. But for her, she needed her girls, she needed her women. And we gathered on the beach and everybody played a role. I think the other part of ceremony is that when we think about a traditional wedding or a traditional funeral, mostly you're probably picturing yourself sitting there watching it happen. You're not actually engaging in it. You're not participating. You're not adding to it. You're a witness, which there's an important part of a witnessing. But I think the more we can engage people, give them a role to play. So everybody that gathered that day at her divorce ceremony had some role to play. They contributed to it. And I think that's what made it so powerful, not only for our friend, but for each of us. We got to grieve the end of their relationship, which was so important to us. Like one of my friends played in a band with her ex-partner. So like we were intertwined. And so and I've done many since then. And I think that theme comes up a lot, is how much we grieve as a community. And there's not a lot of space within a divorce. And I'm not saying that it's more important or less important to anyone involved. But I know in-laws often have a hard time. This person was part of their family and now they're not. And what do they do with that grief? That grief kind of goes unacknowledged, and then it festers. It kind of gets pushed down, and then it shows up in other ways. So my, living ceremonially for me is all about like bringing it to the surface. We're not going to fix it, but let's bring it to the surface. Let's, it's better to move it through us rather than push it down.
And that's what people are afraid of. Those emotions are big and scary, and we are not in this culture really allowed to have them, right? So you look at these weddings that are 250 people and it's a celebration. You look at a divorce, and quite frankly, for a lot of folks, it's also a celebration. They're moving on to a healthier, happier way of living. For some, of course, I'm not speaking blanketly, but for some it is. And so, but then we're told by society, well, that's a sad thing. I'm so sorry for your loss. And it's like,
also should be done in quiet.
Yeah, and behind closed doors. And how dare you grieve publicly?
A wedding, a baby, a birth of a baby. People, these are marked milestones that people attend. But a divorce should be done behind closed doors, quiet.
Yeah, so we need to sort of shift that.
Which is what we're doing here.
I
want to know what a divorce ceremony looks like, though, because I've never been to one. I'm like, should I have one?
It's not too late.
Can I have a theme?
What about with the kids? Like, is that helpful? Can we talk a little bit about that? Like, how would a divorce ceremony, again, if you're in an amicable kind of state with your ex and you're able to truly come together in the best frame of mind, because we don't want to put people who aren't ready to be in that sort of shared environment. But that aside, sort of blue sky vibes.
Marking the occasion in some way that
gives the children maybe some closure or some ability to
like just
both
put
celebrate
it in time.
And grieve.
Because I find with children, especially because they don't really know in their memory when these things happened, and that can be confusing.
So tell us, what would that
look
like? We got very excited.
But I want to know what I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, what's the reality of that?
What does it say? What is it?
So here's where you need to start. You need to stop trying to imagine what it looks like for everybody. Because if I were to tell you, picture a wedding, I pretty much can guarantee all three of us will have a very similar idea of what that wedding looks like.
Right.
That's what we need to throw away, because we need to get married. We need to get divorced in ways that are completely unique and meaningful and personal to us. So it's going to look different for everybody. And that's where I think the fear comes, because it's like, well, where do I even start? So I recently hosted a divorce ceremony for a friend's sister, who I know a little bit, but she'd gotten divorced during the pandemic, and it was kind of very quiet and guilt and shame and a lot of kind of negative emotions. She wanted to host an evening. She wanted to host a divorce ceremony. Her sisters wanted to kind of create it for her. She was terrified of it because it was scary and new. But she also wanted it to be a fun night. She loves to like party and bring her friends together. And so we have a sauna in our backyard with a cold plunge and a fire pit. And I said, well, why don't you have it in our backyard? I'll come and I'll lightly guide it and host it. But you guys can also have an evening of drinking wine and having a sauna and getting in the cold plunge and having, a real experience. What happened that night, I think, for her, and she shared this with me, is she had no idea how much other people were holding. The guilt that they felt for not showing up for her personally, the responsibility, the isolation she felt, all of the things that she expressed, people were also feeling that.
And you mentioned your app, Be Ceremonial, which is an app that you've created with your husband. that helps people do this and helps individualize their experience. So why don't you tell our listeners all about that? Because I'm so curious to hear what this app looks like.
Yes, our third baby that was birthed during the pandemic. The second,
Like our podcast is our third baby.
Totally.
It's like this totally.
the second week of the pandemic, my husband was the CTO of a tech travel startup. Not what you want to be in the middle of a global shutdown. Travel.
Yeah.
So
Travel's not.
he lost his job. My company kind of went quiet, and we found ourselves at home with 2 small kids. Reflecting back,
Very young kids.
yeah,
at
2
that
and 4,
young.
time 2 and 4.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
thought, what do we wish we'd had? And at that point, I was already creating ceremonies for people all over the world. I'd had people, I was doing organ transplant ceremonies and, different types of ceremonies surrounding job loss and layoffs and working with corporations. So there's so many, as a kind of ceremonialist celebrant, they had already kind of opened up a lot of doors. So I had all this knowledge and all of these ritual ideas and the inspirations and stories. And so we decided to create like a choose your own ritual adventure app. So it's very much like self-guided. You get to go in, and if you want to, it's across the life cycle. So there's rituals around trying to get pregnant and going through IVF. There's rituals around pregnancy loss, stillbirth, abortion, miscarriage. There's pregnancy loss, or there's ceremonies around like the new moon and the full moon and the first day of spring and the holidays. So you kind of move through the life cycle. There's ceremonies around menopause and menarche, like a girl's first period and our last period. I hosted a menopause ceremony recently with a bunch of women, and it was so phenomenal to bring our stories around menstruation to the surface and talk about what menopause looks like and means to us.
You're like all over this.
I love that. I mean, talk about you're talking about stigma and shame and isolation,
all of these things, and pregnancy loss and IVF. Like so many people struggle with IVF, with fertility issues and pregnancy loss, and they do it sort of quietly,
alone,
because there's no marked real occasion for people to come over and to really, support you.
So folks come into your app and then they sort of cherry pick what feels right for them.
Yeah, you can also gift it to somebody else. So part of your membership is you can gift as many ceremonies as you want to others. And the gift economy is just my way. I love being in that place where you have a friend whose mom just died. You can gift them a ceremony to address mother loss and how they can create a mother loss ceremony for themselves. You have a friend her daughter just got her first period. You can gift them a menarche ceremony and invite them to kind of reframe how, rather than just like giving the kids some pads and, Nick's underpants, like how do we create ceremony around this? How do we welcome and usher kids into adolescence? You go into the app and you pick the ceremony type that you want. I think there's almost 40 types right now, and from beginning of life right to death and beyond. So legacy, how do we walk with our grief? There's a pet loss ceremony in there if you lose a pet. So how do ash scattering if you're looking to kind of create that longer legacy. And then you go in there and you pick and choose the rituals that are meaningful to you, and then you're given kind of a blueprint to follow, and then you're invited to add your own meaning, your own stories, and to kind of make it feel personal to you, so that it's
so beautiful. Amanda and I are both so grateful that you could, come on and share, and not even on this platform, but just your ability to share your own story and to break down those barriers and the stigma in and around, fertility loss and all of the struggles that we are all going through. This is the human experience. And now there's a place where not only can you name it, but you can build like a cool Lego set, the exact perfect ritual
way
for you
to just commemorate that time of your life.
Yeah.
My husband is Swedish, so we say it's like a IKEA building set. It's like, here's your Allen key. You can make your own ceremony. But it's interesting. Last week, just to bring up the idea of invisible losses, I shared on social media that I got hearing aids for the first time. I'm losing my hearing, and I have been for many years. And I created a hearing loss ceremony where I kind of acknowledged what I was letting go of and what I could now hear with these hearing aids. And I shared it, and I've had so many people reach out to me privately and say, I feel so seen. I got hearing aids 2 years ago. I didn't know I could create a ceremony. My whole world shifted for good and for bad, for, dark and light. There are so many moments around it that are overwhelming. But just bringing more attention to all of these moments that we go through that are so huge for us and nobody else sees, right? We keep them quite hidden. So the more we can do to just humanize ourselves and make it, make others realize that we're all fighting something and going through things at all different points of the week.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's so amazing. Thank you so much, Megan. And everyone go check out Be Ceremonial.
Yes, download it.
And get some divorce parties happening because they're great.
They are. They really are. They're one of my favorite types of ceremonies to create.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver, produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.